Chapter 2, Lighting a Cube. Alright, so this chapter is pretty straightforward. We're going to learn how to light a cube or a box. The main thing I want to emphasize is there's a big difference between a cube with a flat surface versus something like a sphere where it's curved. Just as this cube has these flat planes, we're going to use the straight lines to construct a cube as you see here. Taking our previous exercise into account, you'll notice that the flat planes correspond with these swatches, where they're flat in 2D, where a curved surface for the sphere will correspond with the gradients. So as we work through our renderings, you want to be aware of these major differences. Before we can start rendering the planes of this cube, I will demonstrate a little bit about light logic using a stick. So in order to light a cube, we need to understand what it's like to light a stick or a straight line. So as you see here, I'm drawing a stick that's kind of on the ground. Now I'll be putting the light direction or the sunlight off to the left. And just as like we were little kids, we were drawing light rays on the sun. So we're actually going to use that sort of logic and thinking in order to learn how to cast some shadows. So from here, I'm actually drawing the angle where the light is coming from. And from the bottom of the stick, let's say the sun is on the left side. So the direction of the shadow will be pointing to the right. And at the end of that light ray is how long that shadow will be. So for example, let's put another stick up here. If the sunlight was a lot higher, where it's closer to midday or noon, the angle of the light source will be really high, which means it'll cut off the shadow length and be a lot shorter. Again, as you see here, with the shadow being a lot shorter because of the light source being at a higher angle. And from there, when you understand the logic of lighting a stick, you can light a cube. Now, if you need to, you can construct this cube using a ruler like I did here, because we're not really focused on the drawing aspect. We're really just trying to get these forms to read using some rendering. Once you have your cube drawn, you could actually see these 4 sticks that make up the cube. So basically we're going to learn how to light each of these sticks in order to find these shadows. Now of course, a cube also has these 3 important planes that we could see. And from these 3 planes, we need to think about how the value is being affected on each one based on the lighting. From here, I've gone ahead and just used my cell phone flashlight to light this cube. I mainly just want to demonstrate how the angle of the light will change the cast shadow, but also the value of each plane. So here I'll have the light up higher, which means the top plane will receive the most light, which makes it a lot lighter. When I lower the angle of the light, the cast shadows are longer, but notice how the left bottom plane is a lot brighter. And of course, the back side is all in shadow, so that'll be the darkest out of the 3. One thing we want to avoid for now is have the light come at an angle that's about 45 degrees and touching on the corner, which means the top plane and the bottom plane on the left will receive the same amount of light. So for now, we want to choose an angle which makes sure that the top, side, and shadow plane all have very different values. Now that we understand some preliminary logic about light sources, I'm going to use a higher angle for the light source in order to have a lighter top plane that's a lot different from the side plane. So as I draw my angles here, I want to make sure that each of the angles I'm drawing with a straight line are very consistent and parallel. From here, I'm going to work on the first stick, which is on the very front. And just as I constructed it, I'm picking the bottom of the stick, drawing it to the right because my light source is coming from the left. So this is why it's important to draw through. As you see here on the back plane, even though we don't see it, we still need to construct that shadow in order to find how the cast shadow is being shaped. The one on the left, we can't really see because it's inside the cube. But from there, when we have these lit, we can then connect the ends of those lines, and then we'll get the shape of the cast shadow. Referencing back to this model here, we want to make sure that each of the 3 planes of the cube has enough of a difference so we can read it 3-dimensionally. Again, before we render, we want to think about the previous exercise and have these planes read simply with these swatches. And for now, we want to make sure we avoid using gradients as we block in the shadows for this cube. Now for this demo, to make it a little bit quicker, I will be using markers. If you have them as well, you are welcome to use them. But what I'm going to use is a set of 5, just like the swatches. Here I have a 20%, 40, 60, 80, and a 10. So just like the swatches, I'm only using 5, and that's plenty to use in order to block this cube and make it look 3D. So to start off here, I'm actually going to block in the shadow side first. So for a rule of thumb right now, we're just going to use a sort of midway point to block in the shadows. So here I have a 60%, which I'll use to block in the shadow side of the cube as well as the cast shadow. So the nice thing about markers, it has a nice controlled value already, and you could just block in sections fairly quickly. Now there are some uneven areas, and I will go back in to even them out a little. But right now I'm just concerned about trying to make things a little bit neat, and with my construction lines, trying to fill them in. So here I've worked my way down, not going too much back and forth, but just trying to do one layer of this 60% gray. So from there, just blocking in, again, the shadow side of the cube and the cast shadow. So the top plane and the side plane is next. And again, with the high angle of the light, the top will be lighter. So for this one, even though it's a white cube that I'm trying to render, it's still going to have some value because the highlight will be sort of the white area. But since this is not a highlight area, it'll be a certain plane. So here I've chosen a 20%, which is light enough, but still has enough value to really make this read. So from here, usually with the lighter markers, they're easier to kind of put in. They don't get too dark too quickly. So now I have the top plane. So the left side is receiving less light, but it's going to be darker than the 20% and somewhere in between the 60%. So for now, I'm going to assign it to be about a 30 or 40%. Here I got a 40% marker and just working my way across down just as I blocked in the top and side plane of the shadow. here my marker is drying out a little bit, so it does require a second layer to get a nice even coat. So whatever medium you're using, whether you're using graphite, markers, or both, make sure you have a nice even coat before you move on. Now that I got the cube blocked in the general values, I will start using some gradients to get a little bit more subtlety in these planes. Now, the reason for that is there's a little bit more factor into the actual lighting that we need to consider. So here I got the pencil to help me do some gradation to get some of the more subtle values that the markers can't quite do. So just the same thing with the light source at this angle. When it hits the ground plane, it's going to reflect some light. So it's known as bounce light or simply reflected light. Now it won't be as strong as the original light source or the direct light source, but it's still going to affect the cube in a certain way where it's going to light up the surface just a little bit. So here I got a white Prismacolor pencil that I can work my way back in to lighten up this little corner where it's receiving a little bit of light from the surface that the cube is standing on. So it's receiving some on the front as well. Now I know this might be a little bit hard to see on camera, but I'm just trying to get a little bit of a gradation in here and lighten up the marker. I can also go back in with the graphite, as you see here, to darken up and even out some of the areas of the marker that still can't quite even out that well. Now, one thing you can use too is a dark pen to separate the bottom, which is the occlusion shadow, or also known as a pit shadow or contact shadow. So there's many different names, but it's basically where the light cannot get to at all, including reflected light, and it's pretty much a black shadow or black line, as you see here. And basically what this will help with is separate the cube from the ground plane, so that way it doesn't look like the cube is just attached to the surface that it's on. From here, I'm going to speed this video up because all I'm doing here is finessing some of the areas, creating a little bit more of an even tone, or thinking about gradation as the top area will be a little bit darker, and where the reflected light will touch the surfaces, I want to create a bit of a gradient. But for the most part, I'm just trying to make it a little bit neater and evening out some of the areas where it's obviously markered. So this is a little bit optional, but I feel like the top plane is not showing up as bright as I want. And the reason for that is the background is the white paper. So what I'm going to do is just create a tiny background with a dark value. So with a ruler, I'm just drawing a rectangle, a flat plane behind this cube. And then from there, I'm just going to block it in with an 80% dark marker in order to make the form of the cube pop out a little bit more. Lastly, I'm just going to add a little bit of white to the corner edge of the cube. So that's kind of where the highlight is if it was a beveled edge. I'm just working a gradient kind of backwards from light to dark on the top plane. But the main thing is you want to have a 1, 2, 3 read for all three planes, and you want to be clear about what the shadow is. And from here you have a rendered cube, And those are the basic principles.